her husband, Behold now, I perceive this is an holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed, and a table, and a stool, and a candlestick, and it shall be, when he cometh to us, that he shall turn him thither. And it fell on a day that he came thither, and he turned into the chamber and lay there. And he said to Gehazi his servant, Call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said unto him, Say now unto her, Behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldest thou be spoken for to the king, or to the captain of the host? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. And he said, What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, Verily she hath no child, and her husband is old. And he said, Call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the door. And he said, About this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, Nay, my Lord, thou man of God, do not lie to thine handmaid. And the woman conceived, and bare a son at that season. Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. Okay, go back with me. Verse 8. It fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem. I looked up the word, or the place Shunem, a small area. I don't know a great deal about geography of the area, to be quite frank with you. But nevertheless, Elisha would pass by there often, apparently. And the Bible says, Where was a great woman? Great woman. The word great, according to Hebrew, can be defined in numerous ways. The context determines how we should interpret it. For instance, it might say, there's a great woman there, and just talk about a woman of great age. Okay? You can't use the word that way. In your opinion, when he says there was a great woman there, do you think the Bible is talking about she's Wonder Woman? Superman, Wonder Woman, she can jump over tall buildings. Obviously, that's silly. In your view, how do you think where was a great woman?
Great character.
I think that's it exactly. Of a great character. And Milton, I don't know about you, but it's been my experience as preaching that often some of the strongest people in the congregation have been women. I'm talking about spiritually. I remember when I was just a boy, Gary, my parents, Gary's from the area, is the reason I addressed Gary Cagle, but when I was a boy, we would meet at my grandfather's for Sunday for lunch, and Dad would drop Mom and 3 sons off at Stout Hill. He'd go fishing or do something else. Back in that time, there was only 1 or 2, 3, maybe 4 men. The grandmothers would have their daughters, their grandchildren. They would be there, and yes, there would be enough men to conduct the service, but women were the real backbone of that congregation back then. Again, I'm not saying they took the leading role. They didn't involve themselves in business meetings. That's not what I mean. But they were the strength of the congregation. Milton, your experience preaching, have you seen anything of that nature in places?
There's a congregation in Virginia that we took turns going down there, and all the congregation was women. And there was probably about 8 to a dozen women there that were doing the services unless a man came in. So when we couldn't go and fill the spot, they did it themselves. So I'd call all them women great, because naturally the preacher had to do all the singing, prayers, communion, and all the leadership roles. But here were all these group of women that attended there, even though the men didn't, for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason.
All right, hold your place here. Turn back to Judges chapter 4, and I'm not going to spend long here, but I want to make a point. Sometimes we, at least I fear, let me go They may never stand behind a pulpit and shouldn't, teaching mixed audiences, because that's not their role. But some of the strongest of people have been women, and I think Deborah, I just marvel. I hear this man of war, no doubt, Iraq. I'll go, but the only reason I'll go, you got to go with me. If you don't go, I'm not going. And I think Bobby's exactly right, because he knew that God of heaven and earth was with this woman. Okay, here, back to 2 Kings, chapter 4. I got to get through this. We got to get to the end to get all the lessons. There was a great woman, and I see she had a powerful influence to her husband. Was her husband the same age as her, younger or older? All right, the Bible says older. All right, we learned that later in the text we just read. How much older? I don't know. But it's clear this woman had a profound influence upon her husband. I don't interpret this that she had a ring in his nose when she's leading him around. I don't read that. But she did have a powerful influence. Okay, Elisha comes by, and what does she do? Verse 8. Elisha's coming by, and the Bible says she what? She feeds him. And it's even more than that. She constrained him to eat bread. Now, that doesn't mean she put him, she hog-tied him and said, you will eat. But was she persistent?
So much so that make a place for him.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in just a second. Bob, you're exactly right. She's persistent. Please, eat. Why? What did she, whether it was his demeanor, I'm talking Elisha, whether it was his reputation, the Bible says she perceived that he was a man of God. I am convinced it wasn't that she had such respect for a man, but who did that man serve? And he was a man of God. Ted.
But to start with in verse 8, it doesn't say that she perceived him as a man of God. That came afterward. In verse 8, she saw a stranger coming by that she felt the need to feed.
Ted, good point. Maybe I got ahead of myself, because certainly, verse 9 does say that she
Right, but
perceived
then
it.
after they spent time
And that
together,
very well may be. Good. All right, it shows you, again, something about her character. All right, so what does she say in verse 9? She said unto her husband, behold, I perceive that this is an holy man of God, which pacifies continually. And then she has a request for her husband. Verse 10, what is it?
mean, she had given up hope. That was not in her mind or her thoughts.
I think that's it. In my mind, and this is David's opinion, how many times she may have been disappointed. How many times in the past, and I don't know this, but perhaps even miscarriage. And we know the emotional struggles that a woman, and I don't let men fully comprehend what women might go through in that case, where, they're carrying this child and then went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and took up her son and went out. Okay. That's all we hear about this woman at this time. Some things that we learned about, what was her name, by the way? Why Shumanite? Why Shumanite? That's the location. It'd be like someone saying of us, well, that Carter County woman, or that Elizabeth Are there blessings in serving our God?
Yes.
Do you think Elisha went door to door, telling everyone individually, there's a famine coming, it's going to last 7 years, and you need to leave? Now, it's hard to leave our homes. Most of you have set down roots. Probably many of you have lived in that place for 10, 20, giving, what they call it, testimonies, but I can see God's work in my life. And I imagine that so many of you can too. And I'm not saying that we serve